Well, good morning. So let me start with a quick story. So my previous assignment, I was the Air Component Commander for Central Command, better known as the CFAC. And when I came in, this is in June of 2015, ISIS had actually kind of quit running around in convoys waving black flags. And it made it a little more difficult to strike targets. And so we had basically a lack of targets, and our pilots were bringing bombs back home. And so being a fighter pilot, it's very frustrating after flying 5-6 hours and you don't actually get to employ the ordnance that you carried out. You like to come back with your wings empty. As I was doing that, I get the intel reports. And our intel reports, our intel analysts would say, hey, we're seeing ISIS they're moving from point A to point B. They're amassing combat capability. And I was struggling, partly because I felt like if we can see it, why can't we turn it into a target that we can go strike? And so with that, I started engaging with the Air Force intelligence community to actually, how do we better work through our intel analysts, do the processing, exploitation, and dissemination. And I didn't really have any tasking authority. I had really asking authority to have people help me. And it was partly because of my folks I knew and maybe a little bit of force of personality and talking to leadership. And as I did that, it really forced me to think a little bit more deeply about how we employ our intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, how we do target system analyses, and how we do our PED. And so first of all, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you this morning to speak with you today. I want to thank your USGEIF Chairman, Jeff Harris, and your CEO, Keith Mosbach, for allowing me to be here with you. Mike, thanks you for the introduction. And really thank to all of you for your interest in this particular topic as we work together to solve some of these issues. Now, since May of 2011, with the exception of 15 months, I've served at USCENTCOM. I've been the Deputy Director of Operations. I was the Deputy Air Component Commander, the Air Component Commander, and now the Deputy Commander. And because of that, I'll just kind of play on the, that farmer's insurance guy. I think a thing or two because I've seen a thing or two. And what I'm going to do this morning is maybe share a few thoughts with you on some of the things I've seen and things I think we can actually together to work on and to improve our combat capability. Additionally, I've also had a chance in January, the Secretary of Defense published a National Defense Strategy. And so as I look at that, there's some implications for across the Department of Defense, but there's also implications for United States Central Command. And so with that, I've started looking at CENTCOM through that particular lens. And there's 3 lines of effort within the National Defense Strategy. The first is to rebuild the military readiness so we become a more lethal joint force. Second is to strengthening alliances as we attract new partners. And then third, reforming DoD's business practices for greater performance and affordability. Now, considering those themes and those lines of effort and the themes for this particular symposium, I believe we must continue to improvement in driving data to decisions and actions so that the joint force is more lethal, is inclusive of our coalition partners, and it reforms our processes to achieve greater effect. Which takes me to what I want to discuss with you this morning. I want to talk a little bit about ISR planning. I want to talk about an evolving concept that CENTCOM is employing its approach to processing, exploitation, and dissemination. And then most importantly, for this particular audience, with regards to line of effort 3, I want to talk about opportunities for innovation and reform. So when I look at ISR planning, I look at it basically in 4 parts. There's the resourcing aspect of it, it's the requirements aspect of it, it's the scheduling, and then it's the PED at the end. For the resourcing, that's actually done through our global force management system that's run by the Joint Staff. And what they do then is actually take the resources we have available to do ISR and divide it up amongst the combatant commands for us to go employ. And then when we talk about the requirements piece, the collection requirements management, that's run typically at the combatant command level. We've done it either at CENTCOM or push it down to our joint task force level. And what they'll do is then kind of are the authoritative guidance on the collection requirements. And then we have the scheduling. And the scheduling is done through the collection operations management. And that's typically pushed down to the air component commander to put that onto the ATO. And so they are tasked now to schedule the resources across the area of responsibility to meet the commander's requirements and priorities. And so I really do believe we have some pretty sound processes and assigned responsibilities for the resourcing and capability, the defining of collection requirements, and the scheduling of the capability against the commander's priorities. But I do feel that our processes for PED are not as sound or as mature as the first three. And so as I return to my opening part of the story I started out with, during the initial months of my tenure as a CFAC, I found that we didn't really assign PED very well, and which was challenging me to actually develop targets that we could go strike. And we'd actually taken the model we'd used in Afghanistan and really put it on top of Iraq and Syria. And we weren't developing deliberate targets. And we kind of lost a step or two in relation to that. And so what I did then was I actually talked to my staff there, and we actually only had a handful of targets that we could go strike that were deep into where ISIS was operating. And from that, what I did then was I actually talked to them and go, who's doing our PED? How can I get them to work with my priorities to actually develop targets so we can go strike some things and put some more pressure on ISIS? And so what we did then was I actually put out a message to the broader Air Force community. I gave them kind of a homework project and said, here's what I expect you to do in support of me, and I'm going to grade your homework. And then I started bringing my staff in with every week to tell me where we were in the development of targets. And so we went from a handful of targets to multiple targets in development, so we were actually then able to strike deep into, further into where ISIS was operating, where they had a little bit of sanctuary because we weren't putting any pressure on them. And so with that, that concept over time it was kind of ad hoc. We started to develop it within the air component, but then here at CENTCOM, they've taken it a step further. And as we start working with our joint and coalition partners, they actually codified this on paper back in January. And it's they published the Theater Exploitation and Manager concept. And with that concept, we found that we had an overwhelming amount of ISR collection. And with that came basically unprecedented amount of data that we had available to us that we had to take a look at. And we really overmatched our capacity to process it all. So what this concept does, it establishes a framework to allow us to, and procedures to do some prioritization and optimization of our PED enterprise. And then what it then also did, it assigned this responsibility to the Air Component Commander, or the CFAC. And what the CFAC does now, it has the authority for theater exploitation, operations management, and the direction of how we do our PED. Now, the CFAC then takes that and matches the PED capabilities that we have and prioritizes those and optimizes those against the requirements defined by either the JTF, the Joint Task Force Commander, or the combatant commander. And what we do now is, just like we have an air tasking order on the front end that dictates where we're going to move our airplanes to, where we're going to put our ISR to collect, we're doing the same thing from a PED aspect now. We're tasking different agencies in different parts of the enterprise to have a set of responsibilities to match up with our priorities in order to execute whatever the task we're working through. And so we've just started the concept. So we basically have looked at it. We've got 3 levels of maturation that we're working through, and we're really, they're really to facilitate, synchronize, and direct. Right now, we're just at the facilitate piece. And what I mean by that is we don't really have the tasking authority because this is not in joint doctrine. It is just we're kind of, asking folks to help us do this for the greater good of actually being able to execute. But over time, the goal is to actually get this into doctrine so it actually becomes the way of doing business, not just for CENTCOM, but across the enterprise for all the combatant commands. And so we got a little bit of work to do. Now, so that's the evolving concept. So now as I kind of look to the future, I think there are some opportunities for innovation and reform. And the one thing that I often talk about when I talk to our staff, I really believe there's a difference between what we want and what we need. I talk to our staff about that. I talk to our partners in the region about that. There really is a difference between what you want and what you need. What I find is that most folks want more ISR, but what they really need is better PED to take advantage of the ISR they already have. And that's a hard pill to swallow, but as an airman, I think that's the most important thing, one of the more important things we do. I think there's more data available now than we've ever seen, and it presents a massive challenge for us. Let me give you an example. So annually, CENTCOM, the video that CENTCOM collects, could actually cover 325,000 feature-length movies. The signal intelligence we collect would equate to about 5.5 million songs you could put on your iPhone. I mean, really, who has time to go through all that stuff and sift through all of that to be able to figure out what is the golden nugget of information that's out there that you're going to be able to execute on or make a decision on? And so with that, I think we're really missing opportunities, or we're in decision paralysis because we're still waiting for that one nugget we're going to find in that 325,000 hours or movies that we might be watching, or 5.5 million songs, or any other intel aspects that we have. That's just the tip of the iceberg, in my opinion. So I offer you a rhetorical question. Is PED tooth or tail? Which is more important, the collection or the PED? I have a couple of opinions on that, and I'll leave it to you to maybe ask me about that in the Q&A. But I think as we look at it, what we end up doing is we spend a lot of money and time developing and fighting about the ISR on the front end, and less time talking about the PED on the back end. And the PED's what's going to drive our decision making to go execute. Because of that, what we end up doing is, because it's very service focused in some cases, we're doing government-owned, contractor-operated, or contractor-owned, contractor-operated, or we're using non-program program of record or proprietary information. And so we're really, with some cases, all over the map when it comes to being able to move forward. Now, I think we would all agree that the criticality of GEOINT and all the other ants to help us in the deliberate targeting process. And what I'll tell you is, while CENTCOM builds upon its theater exploitation management concept and works the concept so it's included in doctrine, I would submit there's some opportunities for innovation and reform. I do believe we need to review our ISR and PED acquisition standards. Ultimately, we want to decrease what I would call the ISR to PED misalignment. We're making PED acquisition just as important as the acquisition of the ISR on the front end. I think we need to develop and comply and maintain standards of ISR and PED enterprise architecture. Now, at the reception on Monday night, I was over here and I talked to a few of the folks in the industry, and I can fully understand that they do not like DoD providing standards. But the real goal here is to actually not be so rigid and prescriptive to stifle innovation, but the goal here is actually how do we ensure that we have interoperability across all the different systems. And that would require us to have some type of structured data so we can help improve the data exploitation that we're trying to get done. I think we also need to develop capability and policies that are with our coalition in mind. We don't fight alone. And right now, here at CENTCOM, here in Tampa, we have 52 nations represented at our headquarters. And from one officer to a team of 14 to 15 per nation. So we have a lot of capability there, but we gotta tap into it by being coalition friendly. And then we also need to fuse the data into common intel and common operational pictures. Pictures that are interpretable at all levels of command, pictures that are coalition friendly, and then pictures that we can incorporate publicly available data. It's amazing how much information we get off of social media, but it doesn't always feed into our classified systems. Matter of fact, sometimes we know about things based on social media posts from across the region before we get it through an intel report. And so there's gotta be ways to pull that stuff in there, the broadest atmospherics, the indications and warning that we require. So in closing, let me leave you with the following. We're learning a lot of lessons in our current operations. I think the challenge here is how do we codify and characterize this for future operations? And I will tell you, one size does not fit all. The operations we're doing in Afghanistan, the operations that we're doing in Iraq and Syria will not be the operations that we will do in the future, whether it's in the central region or any other combatant command. I really believe that the environment, the facts, assumptions, and the coalition will all likely be different, and we gotta be able to account for those and have the strategic agility to do so. Now, CENTCOM will continue to the development and maturation of the theater exploitation management concept with the tools we have available today. At the same time, we appreciate your support as we collectively pursue opportunities for innovation and reform to ensure we are driving data to decisions and action. Thanks again for the opportunity to be with you today, and I'm ready for your questions. I kind of call it question and opinion because I don't have any answers, I have opinions. if we had all the answers, we wouldn't be having a conference like this. But the goal here is actually to spur our thinking so that we, again, together we can actually make us a more capable force, not only for the United States, but really for all of our coalition partners that have a common interest. And so with that, I'm ready.
And sir, thank you very much for those remarks, because I certainly relate to all the things from a combat support agent perspective and working with our warfighters. I'll start the questions with, what about the PAD, tooth or tail? Talk a little bit more about that.
I think it's a little bit of both. And that's why I'd almost be of the mindset that you would actually kind of buy it together. And I know we do that in some cases, but I tend to see that we spend a lot of time really focused on the front end, and we fight about, what piece of asset I have to overhead whatever thing, but we don't talk about the backside of this. And so I think we need to raise the prioritization in the discussion so that it's almost they're equal. So I really think they're both tooth, because otherwise, all that data we have more data than we can actually analyze right now anyway. So why do I need more of this on the front end? In some cases.
Exactly. I think a lot of us feel that there's been a lot of, for buying overhead assets or air breathing assets or whatever it might be, but then we drop that pipe down and 5 feet above the ground is where it ends. Nobody's thought about what do we do from now to get it to the ground and get it processed. Okay. Talk a little bit more, if you would, about the second thing that you mentioned from DoD, strengthening alliances. Can you give us some couple examples of how we've seen alliance work very well together, and some things where we might do better?
I think one of the key things I look at, particularly when we look at our operations in our region, is our operation in Afghanistan that's a NATO operation. And so it's very easy to bring our NATO partners in based on that. Now, when you look at the operation in Iraq and Syria, it's a coalition of about 73 different nations and organizations that have come together. The real key, and we call them kind of the framework nations, most of those members are all NATO allies. This is not a NATO operation, but because of the relations we have with our NATO partners, it's easy to bring them in, because one, we have a common interest, we have interoperability, we've worked together before. And so that helps us. I think the other aspect that I take a look at is, as we look at our partners in the region, a number of them have a lot of money. They like to buy bright, shiny toys, but I think there's a difference between those bright, shiny toys and the capability. And so working with them to help them come along to understand not only the equipment on the front end, but how do you do logistics, for example? How do you do other acquisition type things, and how do you have the human capital to actually execute with all the capability they've bought? And in some cases, they buy more capability than they actually can use, and it's a little bit of internal competition within the region between our partners who have a lot of money, who are trying to outbuy each other sometimes.
And talk about now, when you go through what you just said, what do you see the future of the AOR and the coalition or alliance is looking like?
Well, I think that they're going to be even more important for CENTCOM. And the reason why I say that, if you've had a chance to read the National Defense Strategy, one of the key things it highlights is the great power competition, highlighting China and Russia. And so part of that is that CENTCOM, United States Central Command, will not have the resources that we have today. We probably have about 90% of the Department of Defense's ISR capability within our region. And so right now we're going kind of what I would call through the 5 stages of grief. I think we're past denial, but we're not quite to acceptance yet. And so what we require is, how do we work better with our coalition partners, because they're not going to have a lot of U.S. capability that's going to be there. And so that's why that's hugely important. And it's another reason why I think it's hugely important that we develop the capabilities of our partners in the region. And you've probably heard our president talk about how much money we spent. He's hoping to get some of them to bring in some of their capability into the fold as well. We got to help them with that.
Now, staying sort of on the theme also of innovation reform, obviously having been downrange and you've spent a lot of time there, I know that we always had a lot of wants, but sometimes when you translate those into needs, it's very different. But talk a little bit about the acquisition process and how we go from identifying the wants to needs and acquisition, and how innovation has been brought into the theater.
Yeah, I think I'll give you one quick example. And so, as the Air Component Commander, we have a number of tankers that are supporting our operations. And all of our tanker planning was done on a whiteboard. Seriously, on a whiteboard. And with magnetic pucks, and so they didn't have a lot of bandwidth in order to actually do the flexibility in thinking. And so as I worked with TRANSCOM and Air Mobility Command, they were always asking for tankers back. And I always told them I would not give any tankers back until I got a tanker planning tool. And I started that discussion, and then DIUX came out to the CAOC, this is after I left, and observed the tanker planners for about a week, and they built them an electronic tanker planning board. Looks just like the whiteboard, but it's all electronic. And so about 6 months ago, I went back out there to go see it for myself, and it's pretty impressive because now they have the bandwidth to start thinking and gain some efficiencies to actually now free up some tankers for TRANSCOM to go do some other things outside of our area of responsibility. So that's one example. I think the other example I've seen also is just how do we actually take some structured data, because we're building these slides on operations and what the Russians and the Syrians were doing in Syria. It would take our analysts about 7 hours to build the slides. Because they were able to structure some data, now they're able to do that in about half an hour. And so it's things like that that actually help us be able to have a little more time and bandwidth to start thinking and analyzing versus spending all our time building the product itself.
And so maybe specifically to this conference, what do you think is NGA's most valuable support to your needs, and what grade would you give the GEOINT community for providing support that you have? Well,
really, I think if you look at the video you showed at the beginning, we were in our headquarters here 2 Fridays ago, and we couldn't do all the things we did without the GEOINT ahead of time and the GEOINT afterwards to assess how we did. And so that part, it's a big contributor to what we do. It helped us decide or make recommendations what targets to go strike, and so it's how all that information comes together, and we can get it pretty quickly to pull those things together. I would give, I would say a B. If I gave you an A, you quit trying. But a B, and I think what our goal is, there's, someone that once told me, the largest room in the world is room for improvement. And we can continue to improve and build upon because, whatever, as I said, the environment that we have today will not be the environment we have tomorrow. And there's technology out there I still think we can take advantage of.
And next, do you think the changes that you're talking about in the PED process, will that change the way we fight at all, or will it improve it, or what would be the goal there?
I think it will improve it, because if we were able now that was a challenge I had when I talked about the deliberate targeting piece. It take us roughly about 90 days to develop a target. If we can get that to where you can develop targets much quicker, that gives us more options to put more pressure on our adversaries. And it's not just the targets that we go strike kinetically. Another piece that I've been working on is how do we do this non-kinetically? And the debate there is, and sometimes it takes us longer to decide on the non-kinetic aspect. It's easier for me just to go strike it. And in some cases, you want to be able to work through that decision-making aspect of it. Do I strike it, or is an intel gain-loss piece associated with this as we move forward? So I think there's great opportunities out there to speed up the process to decision-making. Because the other aspect I think is we have so much information, it's very easy to get, don't decide because you're waiting for one more piece of information.
Right. And back to, you mentioned the Joint Common Operating Picture. Is there an agency or service branch that has the responsibility or the lead for that's going to rebuild it?
Not that I'm aware of. I think that's the real challenge. Everybody's building something, and that was kind of the point of my remarks. It's got to be interoperable so we can actually build something and move forward versus, a lot of grassroots level type work, and we just don't really get things moving forward so we can get this common operation and intel picture.
Now about airmen, sailors, Marines, and soldiers. How prepared do you think those young folks are when they arrive at your command, and how good is their GEOINT expertise?
Really good. And it's not just what we, the training they have before they deploy for us. It's what we are able to tap into that's back here in the United States and other parts of the Department of Defense. And that's kind of when I talked about building deliberate targets, most of the folks I was tapping into were not with me in Al Udeid in Qatar. Most of them were, the folks that were actually making the machine go to drive the requirement with me, but everybody else we're dependent on. And so it's the readiness that we have on a day in and day out. And I think that's sometimes the challenge. When we're out there, we're doing 24/7. Back here, it's not always the same. But once you get everybody kind of going same way, same day, and understand the prioritization and what we required, we got great support.
I think we have time for one more question. You talked a lot about the TTP changes and PED changes, et cetera. Is there a way that, in your mind, that government or that industry can help with the things that you'd like to see modified? Is there anything that jumps out at you that industry could bring to help with those changes and updates?
Well, I think it's keep doing what you're doing. And what I mean by that is we don't know what we don't know. And that's the challenge when those of us in uniform lay out requirements that tie your hands. You ought to slap us upside the head sometime and tell us, hey, quit giving me these really tough requirements. Just kind of tell me roughly what you want to get done, and then allow you to go do the work you do. Because you got great folks that have great minds. You probably have some tools you're already working on. We just don't know about them. And if we write requirements to tie your hands, just tell us. And I think that's the way you can help us work through a problem. And sit down with us. And I think part of it is the dialogue we have will also be helpful to bring that along.
Sir, and thank you very much for taking time out of your busy schedule. Please join me in a big round of applause.
Thank you.